Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Us to get to this point today. People like Dr. Kirsty Wright, who put her career on the line to courageously raise issues, and along with a number of others, come forward leading to the Commission of Inquiry. People, especially like the family of Shandy Blackburn, including her mother Vicky, who rightly refused to give up. People like well-regarded journalist Hedley Thomas, who, like the best reporters, are determined not to give up until they get to the bottom of a critical issue. Today, I can advise Queenslanders that CBRC met to carefully consider the recommendations of Walter Sofronoff's Commission of Inquiry. We want to ensure transparency and restore confidence in forensic DNA testing in this state. We want to ensure confidence in the criminal justice system for victims and survivors. There is a clear need for reform in the way in which forensic DNA services are indeed delivered. There are 123 recommendations and we are accepting all of them. Today we can announce some immediate measures to ensure reform commences urgently. I can announce that CBRC has decided that we will commit $95 million for immediate implementation of stronger services ensuring scientific integrity and bringing a greater alignment to the justice system. Our immediate action includes establishing a new independent interim body, the Forensic Science Queensland, with an independent board, and Forensic Science Queensland will be operational in January 2023. Today I can also announce Professor Lindsay Wilson-Wild as the interim CEO of Forensic Science Queensland. The board will report directly both to the Health Minister and to the Attorney-General. Also in line with the recommendations, a new scientific advisory committee will be immediately established to provide expert advice. By investing in this reform process to bolster our forensic DNA services, we have the opportunity, like Walter Sofronoff said the other day, to become a world leader in forensic DNA services. Cabinet will consider the report in the new year and the Attorney and Health Minister will provide an update on the implementation to the Parliament. So I'll hand over to the Health Minister and then the Attorney-General, and then we're happy to take questions on this, and then we're happy to move on to other matters after that. So I'll hand over to the Health Minister.
Thank you, Premier, and can I also start by thanking the Commissioner for his work and the support of the Council assisting and all of the other staff. Importantly, can I thank the Forensic Scientific Services staff who did come forward and showed great courage in speaking up with fear that there would be repercussions for them, and we are truly grateful for that. I also want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Kirsty Wright. She certainly was tenacious in shining a light on this issue and deserves recognition, as does Vicky Blackburn for her commitment to ensuring that the system is forever changed and improved in this state around forensic science, and of course Hedley Thomas. I do also want to acknowledge that for victims of crime and their families, this is a very difficult time, and we will ensure that we work with them as we work through what is going to be a very complex process. I am very pleased that the Palaszczuk Government is adopting all of the recommendations of this report. That means we can get on with implementing the work that needs to be done. The Commissioner, in outlining the future of forensic services in Queensland, stated this, that there needs to be radical long-term structural change, interim organisational change and fresh leadership, retrospective case analysis and significant and lasting funding injection. Forensic services in Queensland needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that's what we're going to do. The recommendations went to technical, operational, managerial and cultural flaws over many, many years. In relation to the radical long-term structural change, the Government has accepted all of those recommendations and will work through the development of a new forensic unit throughout 2023. In the meantime, we'll immediately commence work in establishing a new interim forensic unit with an independent board of management, a new chief executive officer and a new chief operating officer. The board will be reportable to myself and the Attorney-General. 3 subcommittees will be established to advise on scientific and technical best practice for sexual assault response, and the principles, priorities and processes for retrospective case analysis. With the appointment of Professor Lindsay Wilson-Wild OAM as the new Chief Executive Officer of the interim unit, the public can have confidence in the quality of service that will be delivered for the community and for the justice system. Professor Wilson-Wild was widely referenced throughout the report as one of the experts providing advice to the Commission of Inquiry. The Professor will be relocating from South Australia, where she is currently the Director of Forensic Services South Australia, to take up the new role from the 16th of January. Professor Wilson-Wild OAM has had a long and distinguished career, 25 years plus, with a unique mixture of scientific, policy and leadership experience in forensic science services. Forensic Science South Australia is uniquely amongst Australasian forensic service providers in being part of their Attorney-General's department, ensuring that Professor Wilson-Wild has knowledge, experience and unique insight regarding the impacts of forensic DNA analysis upon the criminal justice system and the judicial system more broadly. She has knowledge and experience of the full crime scene forensic pipeline, having commenced her career at Victoria Police in 1996 as a forensic biologist attending crime scenes. She is internationally recognised as forensic expert as the current president of the International Forensic Strategic Alliance, representing them on the International Criminal Court Office of the Prosecutor Scientific Advisory Board. And in 2002, as team leader of the biology team in the Australian Federal Police, she coordinated the DNA analysis of all samples involved in the disaster victim identification and criminal investigation of the Bali bombing and advised of the associated legislative change. Professor Wilson-Wild was commissioned to produce several reports for the Commission of Inquiry and gave expert evidence on numerous occasions, and during these appearances demonstrated calmness under pressure and integrity to challenge deficient processes, and in fact was one of the forensic experts who was going to lead our review when we first announced back in March. I know she will ensure that we can rebuild the trust of the people of Queensland, most importantly the victims, survivors and their families. Professor Wilson-Wild will be supported by an additional 41 ongoing staff and 22 temporary staff through to 2025 as part of the $95 million announcement today. In relation to retrospective case analysis, as outlined in paragraph 227 of the Commission report and recommendations 13 and 14, the case management model for identifying, assessing and analysing the cases and samples will be developed after consultation with stakeholders from the laboratory, criminal justice system, Office of Director of Public Prosecution, Legal Aid, Defence Barristers and Solicitors through the Bar Association Queensland and Queensland Law Society and victim support organisations. The interim forensic unit will have a forensic justice advisory subcommittee that will lead this work. And lastly, on the significant and lasting funding injection, as you've just heard, we are injecting an initial $95 million to help with this work. And this is on top of $2.6 million that Queensland Health put in September when the interim response came down, and the 17 temporary staff that we immediately put on to help support those initial works. I can advise that there has been show cause letters being issued to 3 staff of Queensland Forensic Services, Scientific Services. 2 of those are already on suspensions. They are being issued show cause letters today. In addition, another 2 are being given what we call please explain letters in relation to matters that have arisen in the report and being asked to respond to that. I won't go into any more details in relation to those because those individuals will be provided the opportunity to respond to those show causes over the next 3 weeks. In relation to the interim recommendations, I can advise that recommendation 1 has been fully completed, which is identifying all of the witness statements, 1,260 of those. Those cases and those statements have been prioritised into 4 categories. The priority category, there were 200 statements, 100 have already been corrected and the addendums done. This relates to 6,656 samples, which we will need to go through and identify. Of course, this is just the start. There are many thousands of samples once we go through these recommendations that need to be identified. And in relation to the sexual assault investigation kits, I can advise that we have been working with stakeholders and we have gone out to procurement to get sample kits based on the model between Victoria and New South Wales that we believe is best practice. These kits will arrive in January and will go through a 1-month validation process, and the results of that validation testing will go to the new sexual assault advisory subcommittee being established. And if they endorse those kits in the validation process, then we will start rolling out that, as well as looking at intensive training and upskilling of staff. The last thing I want to say is what this report shows, what the Mackay investigation showed, and the Caboolture report, is that there are cultural issues across Queensland Health. It is very concerning that not only are staff not willing to speak up, but staff are scared to speak up in some areas of Queensland Health. We've already started work to start addressing these issues. It's a conversation I've had with all board chairs and chief executives and Queensland Health more broadly, that this culture has to change, and there has to be mechanisms where if middle or senior leadership are not being listened to or are sweeping issues under the carpet, that they can be escalated. And with this new board, there will be the opportunity to ensure that voices of this unit can be heard, but more broadly across Queensland Health, that staff will be listened to and issues will be dealt with, and there will be consequences when serious complaints are ignored. Thank you. We'll just hear from the AG first.
To use the Commissioner's own words, the findings in this report are disturbing and troubling. But today's announcement is all about restoring confidence and rebuilding trust in the forensic testing system. I want to assure Queenslanders that we are supporting all of the recommendations in the Commission of Inquiry, and implementation begins today, so that we can have a world-class, nation-leading forensic testing process. I want to join with the Premier and the Minister for Health and thank all of the victim survivors that came forward as part of this inquiry, in particular Shandy's mother Vicky. There is an entire chapter in the Commission of Inquiry report about Shandy's case, and I want to thank her for her continued advocacy, as well as the many scientists that came forward, in particular Dr. Christy Wright. As you've heard, the government has today announced $95 million to begin the implementation of all of these recommendations. Importantly, that includes $10 million over 4 years for victim support services, essentially to support those hard-working frontline services to support victims who come forward as a result of all of the case reviews and retesting. It also includes almost $4 million for the Director of Public Prosecutions, again because of the work they will need to do reviewing these cases and assisting to prepare new witness statements. The findings of the report will no doubt be very distressing for many victim survivors, and my message to them is that their experience will be at the centre of these reforms, and there is help available. If you have any questions about your particular case, the first port of call is the Queensland Police hotline that has been established, and the number is 1300 993 191. And I also appreciate that this could be incredibly re-triggering and re-traumatising for victims of sexual assault right across the state. Please, if you do need support, call DV Connect's sexual assault counselling line. The number is 1800 010 120. And finally, I want to advise that I will be bringing forward a proposal to amend double jeopardy laws in Queensland. Queensland has some of the narrowest double jeopardy exception laws, and we want to look at broadening that fresh and compelling exception to double jeopardy so that it applies to more serious offences, not just murder. In Queensland, the fresh and compelling exception to double jeopardy only applies to the offence of murder. I want Queensland to join with most other jurisdictions and expand the exception to other serious offences as well. Sexual assault, rape will obviously be in consultation with the Bar Association and the Law Society and legal stakeholders, but looking around, almost every other jurisdiction extends the exception to double jeopardy to serious indictable offences.
General, what's the government's assessment of the flight risk of those earlier suspects who couldn't be prosecuted because of the deficiencies of DNA testing who might want to flee now ahead of reinvestigation? Is that a real worry for police?
Look, it's not something that came up in the Commission of Inquiry, and the Commissioner, obviously very experienced, former President of the Court of Appeal, went through at quite some length to detail how we actually rebuild the forensic service system in Queensland. So we will, as a matter of urgency, be getting all of the stakeholders together to review those cases, to make sure that we are retesting those cases that are urgent. Those matters that are currently before the court, of course, will come first.
Is that a real risk, though, that those suspected of very serious crime being reinvestigated could be heading for a country without an extradition treaty, for example?
Well, look, I'm sure the Queensland Police are alive to that, but it is not something that has been raised to date.
In regards to the report, is it a concern to you, though, Attorney General?
Well, again, I'm sure the Queensland Police will put in place any measures they need to as we review these cases.
Attorney General, when do you, hope that these amendments to the double jeopardy laws will be in place by?
So next year, I'll be bringing forward a proposal to bring Queensland into line with other jurisdictions.
And to clarify, they would apply to these cases here that
Well, not all of these cases, but we would extend it to serious indictable offences, and as I said, we will consult with legal stakeholders about those offences and look at other jurisdictions, but certainly sexual assault and rape would be included.
And when you say proposal, is that legislation or you'll start consultation next year?
I've already begun consultation and I hope to have a bill before the Parliament next year.
So when Walter Sofronoff said the number of cases actually affected and whether different processes, those cases would result in different outcomes, cannot be quantified, is that daunting for the government when you're trying to triage the most serious cases?
Well, as the Health Minister said, this is complex work, but we do have now a roadmap, over 100 recommendations and a process to properly review those cases with the experts. So let's let the experts review those cases. They will also be publishing the criteria that will be used to determine which samples need to be retested. And as I said, any matters that are before the court will be a priority.
With the Inala injustice now before the risotto now all stood down, who's running the lab?
I might get the attorney to, the Health Minister to talk about that. But as you heard, that we now have the new person that will be coming in to oversee that, so that will give confidence. I'm quite sure they put someone in the interim to actually oversee it. But in terms of the report was as thorough as it gets. I mean, Walter Sofronoff got to the absolute essence of what was going on and what was going wrong, and his recommendations have been absolutely 100% endorsed by our government. So there's no half measure here. The whole report is going to be implemented, and I think that's the result that Queenslanders want to see, especially victims and especially the people who put their careers on the line to get to the bottom of these matters.
I mean, we've heard a lot about the victims and what they've had to go through. But what would you say to the police officers and major crime squad detectives who have been frustrated in their attempts to prosecute serious criminals because of this?
Yeah, and I think the report clearly shows that they were raising issues, and these issues were being ignored, and it said categorically in that report several times that they were lied to, and that's unforgivable. And these matters, these serious matters, have now been referred to the CCC, and it's all there in black and white for the CCC to see.
Your department and the Health Department also submitted there would be no time frames on the recommendations. Why didn't the government want time frames on the recommendations?
Well, that's departmental, but also too, you would have heard from Walter the other day, the Commissioner, saying that in some instances it was not possible to put those timeframes on, once that interim board is in place, leave it to those experts to work out the timeframes. Our commitment is all of the recommendations, as put forward, will be implemented.
Dr. Kirsty Wright, you commented on her earlier.
Yes.
You or the minister's spoken to her to thank her or to apologise for what she went through?
I have not directly spoken to her. Today I've been speaking with some other families, as you can appreciate, with the tragedy that happened just a few days ago. But I'm quite sure that the Health Minister will be able to speak to her.
Have you some of these cases go back and forth? Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, have you reached out to the scientists that have had to go back into the lab after giving evidence, people like Kylie Rickard, Alicia Porterman, what's happening with them?
I'll leave that to the Health Minister, but I do know that the Commissioner did speak to the lab employees the other day.
Queensland taxpayers are now having to pay tens of millions of dollars to fix these problems because they weren't picked up earlier. Are they owed an apology? If so, by who?
I think what this report shows very clearly is that not only were senior people lied to, the people of Queensland were lied to by the people who were running that lab. And now we have put in place, over $95 million to fix it and to make it world class. These are the recommendations from the Commissioner, and these recommendations will be implemented.
So you'd say that Queenslanders are owed an apology by the people running the lab, not the government? Who should be apologising for this?
Well, the people who ran the lab should absolutely be apologising, but they are now going to face the CCC, and I think that's a pretty serious consequence.
That was a good point that Sofronoff made when he said DNA is a very complex issue. The authorities, including the ministers and directors general, have no choice to take the experts at their word. In other words, if engineers were doing the same, bridges would be falling over. So was that a fair point that he made? Do you think that?
I think now he's set up a way forward where he's got that interim board of a panel of experts. So this expert body will actually be sitting in the Attorney General's department, and I want to see that moved as swiftly as possible. And we want to make sure that that justice is delivered.
Minister, who's running the lab?
So we've still got the executive director there, although there's going to be some changes across those positions as well. But can I say, in relation to those suspensions, 2 of those 3 individuals have been suspended for some time. So the lab has been operating under leadership of one of our Deputy Director Generals who have been in there as well. So we've had the department reaching into the unit to provide support. As far as the staff, yes, the Commissioner went and spoke to them after the release of the report the other day. All staff were invited to the briefing and also to ask questions about the findings and so forth. We will do everything possible to support the staff that are at their unit. I can assure you there will be no repercussions in relation to their employment. It will not be tolerated. We will support the staff that are there who have spoken up and done the right thing, who, as you can see from the report, have spoken up for some years, trying to draw attention to the testing and the validations and the instruments being used, and were completely ignored. And as the report shows, senior leadership lying to police, lying to executive leadership, lying to the government of the day. To think that these failings go back to 2008 is extraordinary. And at least we're willing to step up and shine a light on this and finally get this fixed.
The executive director sits above the lab's leadership. Who's managing the day-to-day science in the lab?
I'm happy to get you the name of the person who's been acting in that role since September.
2008, are the victims from back then entitled to think in the triaging of cases now being reassessed that they should be at the head of the queue because they've had to wait the longest for justice? Is that a fair call on their behalf?
The police have worked very closely with Health around and Attorney General's office around the prioritisation. They've always had a prioritisation when it comes to testing. They've got a prioritisation of categories, of 4 categories, and the first priority are those currently before the court where people are in custody. So those have to be prioritised first. They are current cases that we need to, if we can, make sure that the evidence before the court is the accurate evidence. They're the ones we've prioritised as far as the correction of the witness statements, and they'll be the ones that are prioritised as far as the 6,656, because they're the ones we've already identified as far as samples. But what has to be done first and foremost is identifying whether further testing or analysing of those samples would make any material difference. If that is just one sample out of 10 and the other 9 already show DNA, then it won't need to be retested. So not, and Walter Sofronoff said this in the report, not every case will need to be further analysed or re-analysed, because when the police go back and DPP go back and look at the individual cases, it might not make a material difference. I'm not mentioning names or positions because we're in the middle of a show cause process. Those letters are going out today. I'm required, and the department, because this is led by the Director General, is required to show procedural fairness for those to be given the opportunity to respond to those.
And what does it actually ask them to respond to? Is it why they shouldn't be sacked? Or
So the show cause, the difference between show cause and a please explain letter is the show cause says we have already reached the conclusion, the department's reached the conclusion that there is improper conduct that has occurred, and they should have to show why they shouldn't be disciplined, which can include termination.
How does naming them deny them fair process?
Well, I'm just taking the advice that I've received, which is that I can advise that there's show cause that have been issued. It's pretty obvious on the face of it from the report who those individuals are likely to be.
When you talk about the culture of people not being able to speak up, people being silenced, and the cultural problems at Queensland Health, as Minister, how do you think that culture started?
Oh, look, as this shows, this goes back, more than a decade. And these cultural problems across any government agency, and the Coldrake report identified this as well. These things can happen for a whole range of reasons, and it's change in leadership, it can be lack of training and skills. We promote people who don't necessarily have the skills to be a manager or a leader, and making sure that they're equipped to manage staff and know how to do that. They could be a good doctor or nurse, that doesn't mean they actually know how to manage staff. So those are the conversations we're having at the moment to make sure that our people in leadership positions have the skills necessary to manage staff and know what they are supposed to do as far as escalating complaints and managing complaints, and willing to act on them.
You mentioned Caboolture, Mackay, and now this DNA inquiry, exposing the cultural issues. Do you therefore trust the advice that you are getting into your office, considering everything that has happened this year?
And look, that's a fair question. I've said that to the board chairs. I expect full transparency when my office is asked questions and seeking information. The obligation's on them and the Chief Executive to make sure that the information being fed to me is absolutely accurate, because governments rely on the advice of our public servants. So it's absolutely crucial. But I can say this, I have a lot of confidence with the team that I have around me. There's been a lot of change in Queensland Health in recent times since I became the Minister. We have a new Director General. I have renewal across my senior leadership team. I have many new Chief Executives across our hospital and health service, and we have renewal happening across our boards. Reform is going to happen in Queensland Health. I have said this to every board chair. It is happening, and I expect that they will work with me to ensure that the reform happens, because we need to make sure we're delivering the best health care to the people of Queensland.
The inquiry had evidence about a scientist, Amanda Reed, who tried to raise problems about the sperm microscopy issue back in, I think, 2016 or 2017. She was then pushed out of the lab. What's happening to her? Has there been any efforts to bring her back into the lab?
Oh, look, this report's been down for 48 hours. We're working through all of the issues that have come out of the hearings and the evidence and what is in this report. It's not appropriate for me to say whether individuals are going to be approached as far as future employment. Employment matters are managed by the Director General, not the Minister, and all of those issues will be worked through.
But for a whistleblower who lost their job for trying to
I appreciate that.
Do you think she should be approached by the Director General?
Look, I'll leave that to the Director-General, but if there are qualified, suitable people to work in forensic services, I've just said we're going to put on 41 additional full-time staff, another 22 temporary staff. There are jobs to be had, and if there are people who are qualified, willing to speak up, do the right thing and are great at their job, then of course we want them to come forward.
Just
And
the
how long
Attorney
does
General.
this show cause process take?
3 weeks.
The people that this affects most are the victims who have gone through this process. They're obviously watching this and thinking, well, will the evidence in my case be retested? When will they know whether they qualify or not?
So the advisory subcommittee that's being established will work through that whole process, identify the cases, how those cases should be prioritised and what their process will be. I believe that where there are matters that are known to ODPP and are on foot, then it would be them, and I think through the victim liaison officers through Queensland Police Service will be reaching out to them. So anyone who has been contacted and advised, this is your case and we will be further analysing, I believe that those individuals will be contacted. And also there is an opportunity for others to come forward. So not only will we reach out, but anyone who wants to come forward and ask, does this relate to me, which includes defence lawyers on behalf of their clients, who may have been imprisoned, who may want to request testing of samples in relation to those cases. So those opportunities, that's a recommendation of Walter Sofronoff, that we allow those people to come forward as well, and their matters and what they want tested will have to be prioritised.
So in general, can I just ask you if your department will be looking at a list of serious offenders already serving sentences for convictions who may have been suspected in earlier crimes before their eventual arrest for another offence? Is that something you're going to look at and weren't convicted in the first instance because of a failure of the DNA detection system? Is that one of the things you're going to examine?
So we'll be implementing all of the Commissioner's recommendations, which at this point is about urgently pulling together the DPP, the Queensland Police Service and other experts to review the cases that may need retesting. What flows from there may be some further considerations, but in the first instance, it's establishing criteria for what needs to be retested and then prioritising those matters.
If there was a case like that, do you think there was someone that had been a victim of a crime where someone was out because of previous DNA error, didn't mean they were in prison? Do you think they would have any claim for remuneration or
Well, I can't possibly comment on whether or not an individual would take any action, but obviously the commitment today is to implement all of these recommendations, to urgently go back and retrospectively look at all of these samples and then make decisions about which samples need to be reprioritised and tested. And as the Health Minister has said, depending on where that matter is up to, if it's before the DPP, if it's an active court matter, the DPP Crown Solicitor and the Victim Liaison Officer will work with the victim. If it's under active investigation by the police, then the investigating officer will make contact.
Mr. Sofronoff put a number of time frames on a number of recommendations. Does the clock start counting down now, or when can we...
Implementation begins today. So work is already underway across the Department of Health and my department to implement these recommendations. And as the Premier said, the Minister for Health and I will report to Parliament on that implementation.
Senior police will tell you that serial offenders are emboldened by a lack of their detection. Is that a major worry for you to think that there are repeat offenders out there that have gone undetected?
Of course it is. Of course it is. And as the Commissioner said, we don't know the extent of it, but as a result of these failings, as a result of these individuals lying to government and to police, there may well have been miscarriages of justice, but that's what we're fixing today.
Mr. Sofronoff, in his report, found Queensland Health, the steps taken by Queensland Health to set up an external review were insufficient. So the Department Executive discussed the potential for this review in March. Terms of reference were agreed to for a month. Then the idea ultimately jettisoned after another 4 months. All this despite the increasingly urgent concerns raised by scientists and cops in the Australian. Do you accept that your department underestimated the issue even when you knew things?
The difficulty we were having at the time with the review is sourcing expert scientists, forensic scientists, who wouldn't end up having a conflict because labs sometimes do work for other labs or in relation to samples for the police, that wouldn't have a conflict in relation to this review. So, there isn't a large pool of forensic experts out there to choose from, and we did have situations where individuals who were identified weren't able to actually do the work for us because of those conflicts. So that was part of the problem. But we all can do better when it comes to these sorts of processes. Until we saw the evidence coming out of the police, and we didn't know the police were asking for samples to be done, to be tested, to test the theory basically of does the quant value in the range that they were putting the no DNA or DNA insufficient for further processing. They were testing that theory. We didn't know they were testing that theory. But because they did, and the task force report, Women Justice Task Force report came down showing that the statistics were extraordinary. It was shocking. To think 30, 40% could come back positive when witness statements were being produced saying no DNA is shocking. It is absolutely extraordinary, and for people to be lying about that. So at that point, obviously, we did what needed to be done, and that was initiate this Commission of Inquiry.
Just on that, I guess just on the QPS, I guess not your department not knowing that the QPS was also kind of making noise in their own end. The public service shouldn't be operating in silos. Why aren't the upper echelons of the public service talking to each other?
Oh, and these are things that, through these recommendations, there will be improvement in the way that there is communication across agencies, especially agencies that rely so heavily on each other, whether it's Justice and Attorney General, Queensland Police Service, Health in the justice space. This is critical. I absolutely support the recommendations of Walter Sofronoff that when it comes to the justice part of forensic services, it shouldn't be sitting with health. It should be sitting with those who have the expertise, who understand that when two scientists disagree with each other, they shouldn't have a third scientist who decides, no, let's make this the decision. It should be that the evidence that goes to court is there's two different opinions. And that needs to have that justice mindset put over the top of it. But there has to be improvement in communication at higher levels.
You mentioned before the challenges involved in recruiting new management. We've seen in other jurisdictions, New South Wales, for example, after the Wood Royal Commission, they went to England to look for a new police commissioner. Is that
we are looking internationally.
Worldwide search part of the equation now?
Yes, we've got what I would say is an international expert. Internationally recognised. We are very, very fortunate. It's South Australia's loss. It's Queensland's gain. We are very fortunate that we have of our new Chief Executive Officer, but we are looking internationally at the experts that we need to form this new interim body and, of course, for the ongoing restructure of this unit.
Will the double jeopardy laws be repealed?
No, obviously we'll take part of that consultation about expanding double jeopardy, so I've still got work to do with legal stakeholders on the form that takes. So at this stage I can't give you that advice because I need to do that consultation.
So potentially they may not be able to re-prosecute serious offences if the advice comes back that way, is that right?
Look, it's about amending the exception to double jeopardy. So if you amend the exception so that it applies to other offences, if you then have fresh and compelling evidence, you go to the Court of Appeal for a decision. So it's not necessarily about whether it's retrospective, it's how that exception operates in relation to these offences. So you can still bring a case, as the Commissioner said the other day, to the Court of Appeal to test whether or not the evidence is fresh and compelling, but these changes would allow you to do that in more cases.
This statute of limitations or something of that sort.
So we'll do all of that consultation, and once we've had that consultation, I'm happy to come and brief you about the form that takes. Thanks, guys.
I've got questions for
Yep.
Okay, couple.
Sorry, just, there's been a report out today talking about a national firearms registry and how there isn't enough cooperation with the states to make that workable. Is that something you want to see looked at, or what do you think should happen there with the national firearms registry?
Are you talking about some of the suggestions coming out about?
Just about between states, there's not enough communication. I think there's reports where there's different laws in different states, and since brought up, not all recommendations have been acted on. We don't have a proper working registry across the country.
I'd absolutely support more national consistency and happy to raise that at National Cabinet when National Cabinet meets next year. And also too, I think there have been some reports suggesting too that more mental health checks need to be undertaken as well.
Are you able to enforce them?
Are you aware of how the trains got their guns? Were they licensed?
Sorry?
Are you aware of how the trains...
No, and I think those questions should be directed to the police.
Have you spoken with the families of the murderers?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Romeo,
I have. Yeah.
Quickly on...
And just on that point, can I say that I expressed Queensland's deep sympathy and condolence for the loss of their loved ones. I also mentioned too that Queenslanders would also like to show their support, and one way in which Queenslanders can show their support is to wear one of these police ribbons, and we'll be speaking with the Commissioner about how we can make these more available to members of the public, especially leading up to services.
Just to change gears quite rapidly, on the 10th of November, you said plans for the Gabba review would be released within weeks. It's now December. When will we see those plans?
In the new year.
In the new year. There's also been a letter sent out to residents in the South Brisbane area about a range of options for the location of the athletics warm-up track and Raymond Park.
That's right, Raymond Park, yes.
Yes.
Yep. That's through the Department of State Development, and that's a consultation phase.
I guess the state government hasn't yet reached an official plan or official agreement with the federal government yet on the Olympics funding. But you guys are kind of going ahead as though that already exists. How confident are you of getting that 50-50 split?
Very confident.
Okay. What gives you that confidence?
I'm very confident.
I only ask because the Prime Minister at the state conference
Yep.
definitely can commit to it.
Yep.
So has he told you he's committing to it?
I'm very confident. I'm quite sure we'll have a lot more to say about it when next he's in town.
So obviously if you're that confident an agreement has been reached?
I'm not saying anything more. It'll spoil the surprise.